Welcome back to the Fans of the Home Team podcast.
I'm Kelsey.
And I'm Miranda. This is a podcast that talks about the fun, the drama, and the effects that sports teams and athletes bring to the world, whether good or bad.
This is a podcast for people who care about sports in a deeper way than who won or who lost. It's for the people who love the feel-good stories behind teams and athletes and realize that sports are just much more than a game.
Today's episode is going to be probably our most serious topic, I would say, that we've covered so far. And that's just the difference between men and women's sports, which I feel like we've kind of briefly talked about in a few episodes, and also the differences between men and women who work in the sports industry as well.
As two women who have worked in sports and have been in close proximity to both men's and women's sports, I feel like there's a lot that we can discuss about the topic in hand and that we're actually educated enough to do so with our experiences. So here we are, being serious.
Trying to be serious. Like Kelsey said, I think this is just an important topic for us to talk about. And again, just similar to even our least favorite and favorite MLB teams, like these are our opinions. Like I'm sure they're biased because we're normal human beings. And these are based off just our experiences and things that we see in the media and have experience working in sports. So we have a few different topics. I think we're going to dive into more men's versus women's sports. So how it's covered in the media, personal experience working in sports, and just the differences we saw. And then once we cover kind of those topics, we'll chat about men versus women in the sports business.
So one of the first things we came up with talking about is why female athletes and female sports in general are just trolled consistently on social media. If you've ever seen ESPN or any other sporting news Twitter account or Instagram account post about a female sport, the comments are littered with mostly men saying, I could do that. She should go back to the kitchen. Things like that. Let's just discuss why this is a thing.
I don't understand why that's a thing. First of all, social media is just so toxic and insane. But if that was like photo of a man like accomplishing, like I'm sure there's probably some trolling comments, but not the amount that women get on their accomplishments. And for some reason it's like I don't want to say downplayed, but looked down upon just because we're a different gender. Like we're literally in 2022. Why are you commenting go back to the kitchen?
That's
like,
so wild.
This isn't the 50s anymore.
Yeah, I think every post gets trolled, but not to the extent of where you're trolling LeBron for being a man. Like you're trolling somebody not because of their sports accomplishments or what they've done for the game. They're trolling them because they're a female. I guess the reason is because people are sexist is I guess the reason.
Yeah, I was going to say misogynistic.
If you're someone who trolls or just puts go back to the kitchen on a female sports post, please out yourself so I can block you because no.
We should just go in and start responding. Like, why don't you go back to the kitchen and make yourself a sandwich? Like, I don't understand why there's just a lack of respect on some people when it comes to women's sports. You can say all you want, like, oh, I could do that, but you can't. Because if you could, you would have done it. You know, like most of the people commenting, like the men, are probably sitting at home playing their video games like, oh yeah, I could do that. Like they probably haven't been an athlete since high school. It's just like, what is the point of trying to tear women down? Like, what is the satisfaction that you get? I think we've briefly covered this before when we were talking about like even men versus women sports fans. For some reason, when there's like female sports fans or female athletes, it's like certain men, again, because I don't want to generalize, because there are so many amazing men who are super supportive of female sports and not misogynistic assholes. but there are some that are and living basically in the 1950s when they weren't even born. So it makes no sense. They like feel like it for some reason, like takes away from their man card or like takes away from them or like men in general. And it's just like, why can't we all be equal? And why can't you celebrate someone's accomplishments, whether they're a man, woman, like whatever? You should just be excited for that person.
People who are trolling are probably not athletes themselves, or anyone who has accomplished really anything of any sort of substance, to be honest.
You're a failure.
Because if you have, you know what it's like to put in work to be good at something. Like you don't downplay it for whoever it might be. So I mean, they honestly might just be, like you said, like a bunch of people sitting at home doing nothing, have nothing else to do besides cry, I guess. I guess cry.
Yeah. And I think that goes, again, back into like trolls on social media in general. Like a lot of those people, when it comes to certain things, like are very like envious. And most of them, like you, like people talk about all the time. Like you click on their profile and in the profile it'd be like, I'm the sweetest, kindest, like John 3:16. And they're like trolling people on social media. Like, that's not very Christian of you. It's true. Like, I think that's just social media in general. And since we're talking about men, but even women do it all the time on celebrities and like tear other females down, which is just a whole nother topic. But like, it'll be like, I'm a mom of 5 and I do like, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, why are you talking smack to this random person's Instagram account? I don't understand it. And even if you look at the coverage of like Simone Biles stepping down because of her mental health versus people like Dak Prescott who came out about his mental health, I think the media covered it well, like pretty equally, but a lot of like people were like, oh, so good on Dak for like talking about mental health. Like he's such a hero. Like we need to shed light on this, which again, both amazing athletes. And I'm glad that people are shedding light on mental health. But when it comes to like Simone Biles, it was like, why can't you do this? They're like, oh, you're just being dramatic, or like, oh, you're just fearful, or like just like taken in such a negative light, where the only reason that comes down to those two differences is that one is a male and one is a female. So why is one viewed as being like a hero and everyone's so proud of him for speaking out, and the other's like, oh, you're just being dramatic, like you're letting your whole team down, you're letting the whole country down?
Female athletes are looked at as worse, but they're then held to higher standards, like they need to be better.
Yeah, 100%.
You need to pick one. Are they worse or are they better? Like, what are we doing? It's almost like a whatever situation we can bring up to be an asshole, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, when it comes to female athletes, 100%.
Correct.
And just like not giving them the proper credit that is due. And again, we're living in 2022. Like, please stop. Everyone who is an athlete is amazing, whether man, woman, whatever. Like so much time, effort, energy, like training. That's cool. Like, good on you.
It's not trendy to be sexist anymore. Like, grow up.
Again, we're not living in the night. Like, we're literally in 2022. Like, please stop trolling female athletes. It's not cute.
It's not cute. No one's going to marry you for it. No one's even going to like you. You're lucky you have friends. So
you're lucky you have friends. They probably don't.
Or they're other trolls. I think a lot of it plays into the fact that female athletes are looked down upon because a lot of times they don't get paid as much as male athletes. And there's definitely a lot of layers to the situation. I don't want to sit here and be like, they deserve to get paid the same amount, because there's obviously a lot that goes into this. But what are some of your thoughts on it?
I think that the best case, though, is like U.S. women's soccer, when their case, and obviously they won, thank goodness, as they should. And that was a long fought battle to even get the respect that they deserve. They're drawing in more fandom, sports media, sponsorships, all of this, beyond more talented than the men's US team, they deserve to be paid equal, honestly, if not more than the men's soccer team. And I think that's probably one of the most historic cases that we've experienced in our lifetime when it comes to male and female athletes being paid the same or as much as men. I can see it from both sides, but female athletes are putting in just as much hard-earned time, effort, all of that as the male athletes. So why wouldn't they be paid the same?
That's definitely like the pro paid the same argument. I think the argument against is it's up to each league. I guess basketball is probably the best example. When you think about the money the NBA brings in versus the money the WNBA brings in, those are very different dollar amounts. If you paid WNBA players the same amount as NBA players, the WNBA just wouldn't be able to financially exist. There's a lot of other issues that goes into like the WNBA and the way that players are treated, but they can't afford to do that because they don't have the eyes on the product that the NBA does, which is a whole nother level to the issue, is that these games just aren't watched enough and supported enough. So then the athletes can't be paid as much.
Again, and we're no experts on this whatsoever. And there's been years and years of research on female versus male athletes and equal pay and all that stuff. I mean, not even athletes, just female versus men in the US being paid equally. Part of it is so institutional because obviously male sports are more dominated and more viewed because the media showcases them more and there's more coverage on them and more marketing dollars and just more financially backed because they have been around for decades. Women's professional sports is, I don't want to say newer, but it's more, just doesn't have the same history as male sports. So it's almost like we started 10 steps behind and men's sports started 10 steps ahead, and we're just constantly trying to catch up. And it's hard for like us to catch up because they had such a jump start. And I think that goes into like the financial backing, that goes into the media coverage, that goes into marketing budgets, like that goes into so many different buckets. There eventually needs to be like a level set.
Yeah, I hope someday we can get there. I remember one time my grandma was saying when she was in high school, there's like no sports for girls to play in high school. Like they didn't even have that option, which is crazy to think about. Like not even be
absolutely insane.
Right. So yeah, there's definitely like a multi-century head start that men have had on female in terms of sports and sporting leagues. I don't know if female sports are ever going to be able to catch up, unfortunately, due to the head start and due to everything else that surrounds it, though, which is sad. But I'm not sure if I see it being a thing.
No, especially if you have like still misogynistic dudes like commenting ludicrous things on social media.
Even outside of that, there's a lot of people who aren't a giant trash can also aren't going to tune into women's sports the way that they tune into men's sports. And we've talked about this before. They're simply not covered the same way. There's no way to watch them two equally if you really think about it.
The best example of proper coverage is probably like college athletics, because obviously we have huge pushes for NCAA football and all that stuff. But I think that there is pretty decent coverage when it comes to like softball versus baseball. Sometimes good coverage of like men's versus women's basketball. When you think about it on more of a professional level, I rarely see WNBA games on. And like we talked about before, they'll put like bowling on. Just like no one, I'd rather watch a WNBA game like that's actually enjoyable, that's actually a professional sport. Those are professional athletes. And I guess no hate to bowlers, but like there are opportunities where they could put women's sports on TV and they just choose not to.
I swear there's more coverage of just LeBron James as an individual than there are women's sports, to be honest with you.
Oh, 100%. And it even goes back to social media too. Like, I think we said this in our like top five, least five, whatever, bottom five, 2021 moments where what's his face? Logan Paul like lost in a fight, or I don't even know.
Yeah.
And he was covered like like there were like 25 posts of him on Sports Center alone or across ESPN platforms. And Simone Biles like broke the record for US World Gymnastics. And there was one like post. Like, are you kidding me? Like, there's just certain things like that. Like, you can say all you want that, like, oh, there's no like iconic female athletes compared to male. And that's a straight up lie.
Yeah, 100%. There's no reason that some of these athletes are the greatest that we've ever seen in our lifetime, but
yeah, Serena
people
Williams,
don't know
like,
that.
are you kidding me?
Right. We're not gonna people just skip over it. When you ask someone to name, like five athletes, probably 98% of the time they're never gonna name female.
No.
Scientifically backed. I didn't make that up. Just kidding. I did, but it seems scientific. I use percentages.
Yeah. Going back to like the coverage of women's sports, so much of it is just like terrible sexist comments. Like, oh, she's being dramatic. I think it was like a few years ago. I think when maybe it was Serena Williams, I forget, but like someone slammed their racket down and like was really pissed off and upset. And they're like, oh, she's throwing a fit. Like, she's being dramatic. She's being a dramatic girl. And like men tennis players do that shit all the time too, but you don't hear the announcers calling them dramatic. There's a lot of pressure and emotion that goes into this. So like, why wouldn't they be pissed off when they lose? Like, duh. Or talking about their outfits. And it's like, why are we talking about this when you aren't talking about the men's outfits? Like, that's such an unnecessary topic.
The women's beach volleyball thing, people are upset that they wanted to wear different outfits. I'm like,
they wanted to wear like shorts instead of the like Speedos.
And there's like 50-year-old men on freaking Facebook, the oldies platform, being like, how dare they not want to wear their assigned uniform? Like, one, it's not a freaking Catholic elementary school. Two, like, just say you want to see them in freaking spandex. Like, don't be like, you're a weirdo and we know it.
Yeah. And three, you're creepy as fuck and sexualizing these women.
Right. Like, we don't have women's sports for men to sexualize them. I feel like that's what a lot of men feel is what it's for. But a lot of times these media companies play a part in it, like the ESPN like swimsuit edition, stuff like that. Yeah. Please stop sexualizing female athletes just because they're athletes. It's gross. And let them wear shorts to play beach volleyball because the sand probably hurts. So
yeah, I wouldn't want to be running around in my underwear either.
Shocking. Like, you don't want to be on national TV in your underwear. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Exactly. And even like this was like a couple months back, Derek was even showing me like a video of like two women pro wrestlers fighting, and just like the announcers saying like sexualized comments about like her in the bedroom and stuff like that. And it's just like, ew, what? Why is that necessary? That's absolutely disgusting. That's so disrespectful. I've never heard people talk about men in that way.
No, they definitely don't.
Because there is that respect. Whereas like automatically you see a female and you're like, oh, I need to sexualize her. And again, this isn't everybody, but there are scenarios where it happens. We literally just listed 3 of them. So
there's clearly too many examples because if we can name them like this, it's happening.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate. And I think that plays into just like almost a lack of respect, because like there's that respect for male athletes where it's lacking in female athletes, where whether you admit it or not, because it could just be like an internal bias as well that you don't even recognize that you're doing.
You know how they call for male sports, like this is like the national championship or like the World Series. It's always the women's college World Series or the women's national championship. Like,
yep,
you have to specify that isn't the top one, basically.
Yeah. Well, even like the treatment of male versus female athletes, I think was it this past NCAA or the other one? I think it was the NCAA tournaments where or maybe it was the Olympics. I'm trying to think where it was like men and women competing at the same time. And it was like the weight room.
It was last year's NCAA like basketball tournaments.
Yeah. And it was like the men's weight room was like the size of a auditorium, like all the machines, all the weights, like everything you can imagine in like a really nice gym. And then the women had like, I think maybe 2 weight racks and some dumbbells. Like, what the hell is that? There are strides that have been made and great accomplishments to try and attempt to equal everything out. But that is just unacceptable.
Well, it's sad that it takes like athletes literally going on TikTok and calling these organizations out for it. Otherwise, they wouldn't change because now it looks bad if they don't, but they didn't really want to. They had to be called out by a 19-year-old. Just do the right thing in the first place.
Exactly.
But I do think it kind of goes into our next topic, which is Title IX and the differences between what men and women experience in terms of college athletics. So if you have no basis, like Title IX was passed back in like 1971. It was basically to help ban discrimination based on sex in higher education. It really wasn't brought about for sports, but the passing of it led over to sports. One of the biggest things it does is it makes sure that there's an equal amount of men and women in college athletics, but there's still a lot of disparities between the two. The worst one is probably the fact that Title IX doesn't require equal spending in terms of men's and women's teams. So a lot of times football teams get a very large portion of the athletic budget, and that's compared to any team, men's or women's. Football is pretty much taking care of number one, and then men's basketball, usually men's hockey is up there too. Inequality in funding can obviously translate to unequal treatment like we've seen, like we talked about with the weight room and stuff like that too. So there's still a really long way to go in terms of Title IX. It really doesn't cover a lot of things.
At least where I've noticed the difference between men and women in professional sports, but also just like sports in general, is college athletics. Because I think a part of that goes towards our experiences as well, because I worked in college athletics all through undergrad and grad school too. We experienced it firsthand, men versus women, because that's what college athletics is. When you work for a team, like when we work for the Tampa Bay Lightning, like that's all men, you know? So I think in college athletics, it was not, I don't want to say easier because that's unfortunate, but yeah, it was easier to see the disparities and differences. I know I've brought this up probably like 5 times now, but the same year that FSU football won the national championship, women's soccer also won the national championship. FSU itself tried to do its best to promote them both equally, but I think just like the media coverage and fans, like that would have gotten so lost and buried because people just, I don't know if they don't care enough or they just care so much about college football, but that is something that I've always been super proud of, is that our like FSU's women's college athletics and their teams are phenomenal. Like they always have been, and they're not talked about enough. I don't want to generalize here, but I think that's what happens at a lot of colleges is like Kelsey says, like everybody cares about football, which is a men's sport. Or if you don't have football, then you care about hockey or basketball, which is predominantly male sport too. When there's like women's soccer, women's basketball, field hockey, softball, like so many women's sports that are doing incredible things and incredible athletes are coming from. And they're just like such a lack of coverage. It's absolutely insane.
A lot of the issues just stem from the amount of money that has spent towards football in general at a collegiate level. When you think about it, they're all college sports. They're all for the same school. Every athlete has to follow similar rules, and every coach has to follow similar rules in terms of how many hours you're putting your kids through training per week or per day. You could almost make the argument that all of these athletes pretty much work the exact same amount of hours and put the exact same amount of time in if everybody's doing it legally. of course. But for some reason, we put a lot of emphasis on football. And in terms of colleges, there's only like 10 colleges that make a profit from athletics. They're very big schools like Michigan, Ohio State, Alabama, USC, those types of schools. I went to an undergrad where no one showed up to football games. There is no way the football team was making any money except for when they would go out to somewhere, whether it was Michigan or Notre Dame week 2, get their ass beat and get $1 million check for doing so. Like that was how the athletic department made most of their money, was from a football team getting their ass beat in week 2 or week 3. So it's actually like really messed up when you think about it, that most of these athletic departments lose money every single year, but still put 85% of their budget, or whatever it is, a majority of their budget into football, which is the thing that is losing them the most money every single year anyways.
I mean, I love me some college football, obviously, but there's definitely some toxicity there. And a lot of it goes into like even deeper financials, like boosters and all of that shit too, alumni, and just the breakdown of how colleges use the funds that they get. And like Kelsey said, referring back to Title IX, like, yeah, this sounded like a big stride. And I think it does have its pros, but there's also a lot of cons to it. I think that a lot of colleges has figured out not ways around it, obviously, but like ways to manipulate to make it more beneficial for them financially. And one of those ways is just not supporting women's college athletics as much as they do the men's. And like, I even remember when I was at FSU, our men's basketball team back then was not good. So this is like 2012 to 2016. Like we were so shitty. Like we never made the tournament. Student wise, like people really didn't show up to games. It was maybe like the bigger games, like when we played Duke and stuff like that, they showed up for. But the women's team for all of those 4 years were phenomenal. We made it to the Elite Eight one of the years I was there. And there was still like just such a lack of coverage and fans. Like the only reason I even knew that is because I worked for the college athletics. Otherwise, there's not much coverage of it like on social media or on campus to know that like, oh, hey, our women's basketball team is really good. Maybe we should show up for a game. But on the flip side, if the men's basketball team was good in later years after I graduated, like everyone would show up for the games. And also they would always schedule like the women's basketball games on weird days. Like they always had a Sunday game because it would be like the old Sunday, like early afternoon game, because it'd be like the older crowd coming out to support them. And that's really what it was for the women's basketball at the time. And students aren't going to show up to a 1:00 Sunday afternoon game after going out on Saturday night and probably still being hungover. It's just like the strategy around certain things like that. I mean, same with softball, especially too. It's very similar. Like they would strategically schedule it on like odd days, I guess. Whereas college football, for the most part, at most university, always locked in for Saturday.
Unfortunately, a lot of teams are overlooked. Mm-hmm. Like I think in most cases, you could probably make the argument that like a men's soccer team or a men's swimming or a men's golf team is also
for sure
at the hands of football and basketball and hockey and baseball, whatever it might be for that particular school as well. Like a men's soccer team in a school probably doesn't get a ton of coverage, no, but I'm willing to bet that they still get more coverage than a women's team counterpart, even if it is, very little for both. I think it still has an upper edge. Most of my undergrad internship was dealing with our swimming teams. So men's and women's for the most part. And it was at a smaller school. Like Miami it's a MAC school. So things are a little bit different than when you're accounting for a Power 5 school and Power 5 boosters and stuff like that. There wasn't really a huge disparity in terms of men versus women. I do remember them telling me that our women, they had 20 scholarships and they can split them amongst kids. Like you can give somebody like half a scholarship or somebody a quarter, or somebody can just be a walk-on. But for the men only had 4 for their whole team.
Oh, wow.
Because of Title IX. But I think that's how women get a bad rep with Title IX, because sometimes when teams need to be cut, it's pretty much always a men's team because you have to even out the men versus women you don't have to even out the, the amount of money spent towards it, but you do have to even out the amount of scholarships. So then women kind of get a bad rap, like when Akron maybe had to cut their whole baseball team. Like it always goes back to Title IX. Like we have to do this so it's equal for the women. And then women in turn get a bad rap because it's somehow their fault that a men's team had to go down.
Which is not.
Which it's not. Like you can always add a women's team to even it out if you want to, or add more women's scholarships. You don't have to take away a whole freaking team.
No, we get a bad rep for what? Like it's not our fault. Like we should be treated equal. There should be an equal amount. Shouldn't just be like all men's sports. I know a big thing at FSU is like people really wanted men's soccer, but like it's just not going to happen. We have like a rec league, but like there's women's soccer. Go watch women's soccer then. Where the women's team is probably way better than any men's team will ever be. Like they've won, I think like now since I've been there, like 2 national championships. Like the soccer team is amazing and they're always competitive and always make it pretty far. So it's just like, oh, we need a men's team. But why? Right.
Your men's team is just going to take funding for your women's team and you're not going to have the scholarship amount. So your men's team's probably going to be trash. Like
exactly.
Just as a like rule of thumb for a lot of places, like the women's, like for Olympic sports, and the women's team at colleges are most always going to be better because they simply just have more players on scholarship because of how much football offsets the men's. So go watch your women's teams. They're actually good.
Support women's college athletics.
That's what I said. I do. Big college softball watcher. So yeah. Follow my lead, please. I'm just a champion over here.
I think it's just a level of respect. Like you should just respect women athletes just as much as you respect male athletes. Stop trolling women and just be supportive. It's that easy. Or just don't comment. Like if you're upset about, for some God reason, successful female athlete showing up on your Instagram, just keep swiping.
Yeah, I think at the very baseline, what all of us normal people who don't troll on posts can do is just watch these games and support them and go to these games as much as we can. Like that's the way to try and make this a little bit better for female athletes. It's the starting point. There's a long way to go, but for them to get money and to be taken more seriously, people have to show up to these things and show media companies and these outlets that we want this coverage. So as much as it shouldn't be on an individual person to do so, like that's ultimately what it's going to be.
Exactly. Now we're going to dive more into men versus women working in sports business, which Kelsey and I have more of an experience in because we both worked in sports business. And unfortunately, we're never professional athletes. So
we were not, never got close, was called by some Division III schools to pay $60,000 a year to be on their golf team, but opted not to do that.
Probably smart.
Yeah, super smart, actually. But yeah, never got close to the pros.
No, my athletic career ended in my sophomore year of high school when I played flag football, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, I played intramurals in college, so that's where that's as far as it got. So
yeah, exactly. So that's why we opted to go the sports business route, and now aren't doing that either. But it's okay.
Our sports journeys have been a roller coaster. Let's put it that way. So a lot of times, like just in workplaces in general, not just working in sports, there's, we talk about the glass ceiling, we talk about pay discrepancy between men and women. We're not saying that it's just women in sports that can be discriminated against. This is probably every single industry as well. But in sports, there's a very high discrepancy between just the number of men versus women that work in the industry. So that's where a lot of problems can come from, is just there's no representation at all. Did you ever feel like when you were working in sports that you were treated differently because you were a woman?
Yes. And like Kelsey said, we can only talk on this subject because we're both women, but there's so many things that are discriminated against, like race, sexuality, like all that. I mean, which Kelsey can talk about too. But I think that we never experience, or I never experienced, I don't want to speak for the both of us, that level of discrimination because I'm a white straight woman. But when it comes to the level of my gender, I definitely think there were certain cases where I think that the men got more opportunities. This is like, again, coming from a white woman, so I can only imagine it in different cases too. I remember like I started to notice it when I did my internship with FSU. One of the guys that I worked with, like he would always get like the football opportunities, or he would always get to go to the post-game interview and like transcribe that. And there was like a full team of us, but the women would do more of like the administrative, like stapling the stat kits and like passing it out to the media and like printing because I worked in sports information. But
me too.
Yeah. And again, there were some really great, and it wasn't necessarily my direct boss because he was awesome and he really encouraged all of us to take on new roles, and like I was given great opportunities from him, but there definitely were certain male SIDs who favored the males. I've just noticed that in sports in general, and I don't know if it's like an awkwardness, or I think it is a comfort level to go to somebody who looks like you rather than going to somebody like you might not have anything in common, whatever. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't happen. I definitely think there were certain cases there. I think there's also like sometimes cases between like my equals.
What do you mean?
Getting assigned like certain tasks because they're more like female oriented. Like, okay. Again, going back to the college athlete, like that was an equal of mine. I mean, again, like he took up the opportunity. I don't blame him for it because I would do the same. But sometimes when you're on a team or you're doing a group project, there's like certain things I like, oh, that's what the girls should do.
It's actually so interesting that we both did sports information in undergrad and then ultimately ended up not going down that career path at all. So similar.
Well, I hated college athletics, so.
Yeah, I don't know what my problem was, but SIDs do entirely too much.
So much.
It's like they're called disgusting.
Like they're media relations, but they do way more than like there's so much that goes into media.
Yeah, I just like it came to a point when I was deciding to like go to grad school. I was like, this is all my experiences in, and I literally don't want to do this anymore. So that's why I went to grad school. But in terms of myself, and maybe it's because I was at a smaller school as well, those types of things, not that they don't show up, but maybe they didn't show up as much. Maybe it's just my experience. I had a really good boss. One of my bosses was female too, so I'm sure that does help as well. But I never felt like that in terms of my undergrad experience, like that there was any discrepancy. I think it was pretty equal in terms of student interns, male to female, but I never felt like, females had to do something because they were female or anything of that nature. Honestly, I guess looking back at my experiences, the only thing I truly remember, I was working for USF, and this wasn't even about me. So I dealt with donors, which is a whole freaking different level of things. So it really isn't even like sports and just like it wasn't even like a boss's fault or something like that. But I remember a lot of times when you pay a lot of money towards an athletic department, you get a lot of perks at football or basketball games. So in the basketball area where all the donors were at, I remember one of my coworkers, she was female as well. One of our job was to like check the donors in and give them wristbands so they could get like free alcohol and shit. And I remember this old dude was like basically hitting on her and being like, oh, I would love to marry you or some shit, like just like weird shit like that. Like, yeah. But when you get into a donor situation and it's a lot of old people, it can get a little dicey because, old people are willing and ready to say whatever they want to say. And a lot of times they come from a place where men and women are not equal. So that was something I saw a little bit working with donors and with boosters and stuff, but I've never really felt personally like I've been discriminated against working in sports, but I'm also very lucky because I've had a lot of colleagues and coworkers say that they have. It's still there. Just because I haven't had that experience, it's definitely still an issue.
Which you sparked another instance that I was working more on the services side, which that's just like a whole different
whole nother ball game,
because people think who they are just because they're sitting in someone else's suite at a sporting event, but whatever. There were instances where, because I was a female, it would be situations like that. And not just old guys, it's like not all guys, but all ages, where there'd be like either like messing with me or like trying to flirt. And it's just like, this is so awkward. Like, I did not ask for this. And it's also hard because it's also your job. So you're trying to remain professional, and especially in like a customer service facing role, like you don't want to a point, it never reached a point where I had to be like, can you shut the F up? But you just have to like play it like, haha, like whatever. It's just like so unnecessary. Again, I don't know if any of my male like counterparts experienced that, but my gut is telling me they didn't, because the service industry I worked in was like an event space. So there was sporting events and then also like concerts and different things like that. There was alcohol involved too. So people, I mean, when there's alcohol involved, people say whatever the F they want, which is just atrocious. Like there's still a level of respect, but whatever. So there were definitely moments where like dudes would be like saying unnecessary things or like trying to flirt or whatever. And it's just like, oh yeah, like stupid BS like that I think women have to deal with on a daily basis. I also think there was a level of discrimination that I witnessed too, and I don't think I like realized it until after the fact / it was too late, because I wish that I could have had this person's back or like understood what was going on at the moment. But it was multiple different forms of discrimination, and just like I think setting high expectations for a woman, because it's like, oh well, I'm a man and I'm here, so you have to do everything exactly that I did or else you're not doing it right. Women, I think in sports already feel a certain amount of pressure to perform, to succeed. So adding to it just because you are a male and you're in a certain position and can take advantage of an intern isn't right or fair. And I think that if it was a male intern, they would have been viewed at differently and respected more. Again, it just goes back to a level of respect. And I think there was a lack of respect. And I think that was really unfortunate to realize that afterward, after she ended up opening us up and telling us about it. There's probably plenty of cases that I've witnessed it. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're witnessing or what's happening to you as well. Because even in my job now, there's definitely a level of discrimination when it comes to customers who walk in the door and act a certain way because they see a female is there. But if a male was there, they wouldn't act that way.
I don't know where people get the confidence to act like such a douche in public, especially towards other people. Like, I can't even imagine having that type of confidence. I don't even like to talk to strangers, let alone like straight up be disrespectful to them first time meeting them. So
when it comes to sports, traditionally, and again, times are changing and we don't want to discredit that, but there's still a long way to go. And traditionally in sports, women would work in like events or HR or like social media. I guess jobs that people think women can do, which is absolutely ludicrous because we can do anything. So there are certain departments like sales and sponsorship, anything to deal with revenue really, where I see it as well, is because I worked in activation and there's sponsorship activation and then sponsorship sales. If you don't know, activation is basically like more customer service based and like you're trying to satisfy the points of a contract. And I always like to say it's glorified babysitting because that's really what it is. And there's traditionally, usually, at least from my experience, more women in activation. And then on the sales side, it's more men. Why? I don't know. I think a part of it is just like not giving women a chance or putting them in these roles to try to like not try to prove themselves because we shouldn't have to. But I think a huge thing that would help solve this problem is just giving not only women, but just like minorities in general, like those opportunities, period. Like there's nothing else to say.
Yeah, there's definitely a discrepancy more so in revenue generating roles than non-revenue generating roles. And I think it has to do with climbing the ladder. So a lot of times in sports, if you're getting to the very highest, position you can get at in a sports organization, that's typically someone who has come up from a revenue generating side of the business. That's obviously a very important part to know if you're going to be running the whole team, to know how to generate revenue for it. So I think a lot of times that's where it leads to a little bit of an issue in terms of teams hiring men over women, because those are the roles they see moving up into manager and director type levels. When I transitioned into working in sales in the sports industry, I never once had someone above me that was not a man. No matter if it was a manager or a senior manager or a director or a GM, they were all men once I got into that side. And I don't think that's a coincidence at all.
No. And those people are also getting, and again, this just goes into like a bigger issue of like our society as a whole, but like those people are making more money, obviously, and have more of a piece of the pie. And so then they can translate that to their household and how like their financial role in society as well.
People always like to bring up and promote people that look like them and are like them. And then, not that this doesn't happen in other industries, but it's pretty prevalent in sports, just from the fact that it starts from the very bottom, that there's not a lot of women. So just the pure chances of a woman making it up to the top are very low to start with.
Even talking about climbing the corporate ladder, our society too, like women are expected to be home and be like with the kids and all that. And I don't want to speak for all women, but for me, like for myself as an example, like one of my biggest concerns when I was working in sports, even when I was going to school, was like I always knew that I wanted kids and I wanted to have a family. And this isn't just sports. This is like women and careers in general, and why there's not a lot of females in C-level or higher up roles, because if you want to have a baby, there is a certain level of expectation for you to obviously be home with the child and also like balance a career. And it's almost, and again, this is certain cases, I'm not talking about everywhere, but where it's like looked down upon because you're trying to have a family. So then you're putting your career on pause, which I don't think most men experience something like that. Like, yes, we have, what is it called? Paternity leave. But I think even in the US, that's not even a thing at all corporations. And even if you have it, it's like 2 weeks or something like that. Whereas like the maternity leave, I think is like traditionally 6 weeks, which don't even get me started on that because that's not even long enough either. But anyways, the US is way behind all other countries on parental leave. So you have a baby and you're trying to soak in all the moments and X, Y, and Z. And then after the first like few months, you have to go back to work. And there's just like a level of pressure to be immediately back to the place you were when you first started. And I've never experienced this because I haven't had a kid yet, But I think I can only imagine the stress and the pressure of like wanting to continue to prove yourself and like wanting to work your way up the ladder. But now I think people could also view like, oh, you've been out of work for 6 weeks. Like you're behind on this. Like now you have a kid at home. Like, how are you going to balance like career and your family life and blah, 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 blah. There are leaders and bosses out there who respect the work-life balance, but it's not in the best place that it could be. I think we talked about this in the last episode. I have had interactions with females who are higher up, and they basically said like they had to put their family life on pause, or they don't get to spend as much time with their kids. There was really never a solution. And I think that's something that for some reason only females really have to consider, even though the counterpart had just as much responsibility for the child as well.
Yeah, and in sports, you're not like going back to like a 9 to 5 where you're home and you can take care of your child and go to their sporting events or their musical events. Like you're literally working 70 hours a week. Like you're missing your kids' stuff. You're missing birthday parties. You're probably missing weddings. You're probably missing funerals to work at this team for, you know, half the amount you can make working at a normal like tech 9 to 5.
Yep.
So I can't imagine going from, I just had this baby 6 weeks ago, to working 70 hours a week and working at games. Like no freaking way. No way.
No, I wouldn't be able to do it. And that was always something I was so stressed about. And like no one seemed to ever have an answer for it. I'm like, okay, sick. I don't think this is right for me then. Going back to just like the view of men versus women, I think, and this is like no shade or no hate, but the women who are in higher up roles have to act a certain way, which I think is, I don't blame them because I would do the same, but they have to be like kind of stern and almost fighting like their womanly instincts. I think we just have to be more like direct and a little kind of hostile and to like just think about things a lot more of ways we deliver things and come across, because you're just trying to compete with your male fellow higher ups and things like that and trying to prove yourself. And I think that like we've always talked about, like if a woman is like super stern, then it's like, oh, she's a bitch. But like if a male is, it's like, oh, he's a great boss and leader. Like why can't you say that about the woman?
Because these homies don't respect women.
And again, it's really like most of the experience I've had like with male bosses have, I mean, all for the most part have been absolutely amazing. And they are those people that are out there trying to make the changes of including women and helping them up the corporate ladder in the sports industry and trying to be a mentor to them. But there definitely are certain scenarios where it's still like that antiquated way of thinking. And I think a lot of it too is institutionalized as well. Sometimes you don't even recognize that you're being biased or discriminatory until someone calls you out on it.
Most instances I've had with male bosses have been primarily good. There's always just like a loud minority of people that make things worse or hold things back for everybody, unfortunately.
Reflecting as well is the only issue I ever like had with a boss, and it wasn't even my direct boss, it was a female. And I think a part of it goes into like that there's like a gnat that's been flying around like the entire time we've been recording, and I just keep trying to catch it and I haven't. So anyways, it's annoying me. But I did like have an issue, and it was a female. And I think a part of the issue as well is like, and why I think it's so important for women to support fellow women, and why we should like never feel like we're in competition with each other, And I think we're getting there, but there's also like that antiquated way of thinking. Like, I'm lucky enough to get this opportunity. Like, if another woman comes in, she's going to take it away from me. Or like, now we're both competing to be like the woman employee of the month or whatever. That's just an unfortunate and antiquated way of thinking, because we should all be lifting each other up, especially in the sports industry. There are so few females and people who can relate to us and what we've experienced as a woman in sports. So like, why wouldn't we want to work together and be on a team together and congratulate each other on our successes instead of tearing people down?
It's actually a good point, because most of the issues that I had with coworkers, I'm not saying like I had ran around and had a ton of issues, but like if there was
happens
ever,
in the workplace.
it does. If there was ever an issue, like I thought a coworker was being shitty or rude, it was most of the time a woman being shitty to another woman.
Mhm.
Now that I think about it, in like multiple different places. Not that I didn't have problems with some men that came along every once in a while. I'm not the easiest person to please or anything. So I tend to have issues with people, but a lot of times I did see a lot of like women versus women hate in the sports industry amongst like coworkers at a very, entry level.
And I feel like we've all been in those situations. And I think a lot of it goes back to like this level of competition, or like how society has always tried to pit women against women when we should all just be working together. It's like they know, like, if all the women came together, we would be screwed.
Because it's facts.
Yeah,
facts.
exactly.
If all women could just be like us, Miranda, like we'd solve all the problems.
Support each other, launch a podcast,
Just things women should do together. Run the world, easy enough.
Even cover things like this.
That's fair. Good point.
Also update. I think the gnat flew into my mouth. So wait, maybe not. Anyway. That's why I was just coughing up a storm.
I hope you figured that shit out.
Yeah, I'm so annoyed.
So we've talked about a lot of stuff. There's obviously a lot of issues still in terms of men versus women in playing sports or working in sports, but we've obviously seen a lot of recent strides that have been made as well. I know one of the things I saw more recently was the women's basketball national championship was like the most viewed basketball game or college basketball game, men's or women's, on ESPN all year. That was definitely a good recent takeaway.
That's proof right there. Like, people are watching.
We just need more.
Exactly. I think also in terms of like women in sports, we've seen a lot, I would say recently, just thinking about the first woman coach for the MLB who made her debut, Alyssa Naken is her name. So shout out to her. She's the first ever female coach in MLB history on the field in a regular season game. She works with the San Francisco Giants. When the Marlins hired the first ever MLB female GM. So there are slowly but surely strides. The NFL with their officiating, hiring more females, even in sports media coverage, like this past year, the MLB having the all-female broadcasting team. So there are things that are happening, and a lot of this goes back to representation, and anything where it comes, for the most part, when it comes to discrimination against gender, race, sexuality, any form of discrimination comes down to representation. And it's just huge as a fellow woman to see other women making these great strides. And I can only imagine young girls out there who maybe are in undergrad of college, like seeing those opportunities and like, oh, wow, I can actually do this. I think we had those scenarios. Like, the biggest one I always think of is Erin Andrews, because she was really the most popular, like, female person in the spotlight at the time that we were like making our way through our sports industry education. So the more opportunities women get, the better for all of us. And that's really the best way to solve this problem, is just affording women those opportunities and also just a level of respect. And I've heard this over and over again, that men think they don't have a role in this, but they really do. And they are the ones that also need to speak up and put the spotlight on their female coworkers, or back them up when you agree with their opinions, or say, like in the hiring process, like try to think of it from an unbiased lens, as hard as it is, because we all have our natural biases, whether you want to admit it or not. So just being able to think of it of not like, oh, this is a man versus female like situation. Like it should just be like, oh, these are two sports professionals. Most of the people in my sports career that have lifted me up and helped me along the way were male. So there are a lot of really great men sports business professionals who do lift women up and help just sports professionals in general. So they're out there. So shout out to them. And if you're not one of them, use them as an example.
I think it just basically comes down to the fact that we have to go not out of our way, but we have to prioritize women's sports, whether that's turning the game on, whether that's going to the game, whether it's making sure your hiring processes are unbiased, that you're putting people in the room that don't look like you, how you're paying people, even, basic things like maternity leave in the workplace, where you're hiring women to work at, how you're treating them once they're there, making sure they actually stay with your company, and promoting them when they're eligible and ready to be promoted, and making sure that they feel supported in that role and not just like the token woman in the room. There's so many things that we can do to help the situation, even on the most basic level of what you choose to watch on TV that day. But every little bit does help if we all do it.
I completely agree. And I think this was definitely one of our more serious topics, but a really important topic to cover. There's serious topics when it comes to sports too. Like, obviously, we love the fun and the excitement and all of that stuff. But there are like serious topics and issues that we plan to cover. So if you think there's something that we need to talk about or shed light on, I don't think there's that many sports podcasts in the first place, but also I don't see any really talking about these issues. So I think it's important for us to cover, especially as two women who have worked in sports.
You'll hear a lot more of our experiences working in sports in due time.
In due time.
Someday. Some people listening probably know, but we got the tea.
We got the tea. We're just not ready to spill it anytime soon.
No, we're still being clean.
Yeah, I'm not trying to get sued up in here.
Yeah, give us a few months maybe.
Or years.
Give us till we're ready to be sued. Just kidding.
So never.
I'm ready right now. Sue me. I got no money. Sue me.
You want to sue me for my student loans? You can have them.
Yeah, that's like the most equity I've got.
Same.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Next week, we're doing another interview with a fan, so you definitely don't want to miss that.
As always, check out our link tree, which you can find in the description of the episode. This is our one-stop shop for you to find all of our social media accounts, and also sign up to share your fandom story with us. Like we said, it's also a great place to just share any topics you'd like us to cover on the podcast, your thoughts, opinions. We would love to hear from you.
And so you don't miss any of the upcoming podcasts, subscribe to us on whatever platform you're listening on. Making a big push, as always, for reviews on Apple Podcasts. Would love your support. It takes 2 minutes to write us a review. Miranda cries at them. I make the graphics. You guys read them. But it's important.
They're so sweet.
They are. You guys are really nice. If anyone leaves a bad one, I'm coming for you. So
I don't think I'm mentally prepared for a bad one. So please no. If it's like a nice constructive criticism, I'm all for that. There better be no trolls in this episode, okay?
No trolls in the reviews. But you can listen to the podcast on literally any place you can think of: Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, all of the above. You can find the podcast on Fans of the Home Team. So I don't want to hear that you can't find it.
Thank you all again. And as always, we will see you next Wednesday.